Hello and welcome to our webinar, Should We Pick and Mix Bank Holidays for Cultural Inclusivity? I'm Georgina from eDays. For those of you who may not be familiar with who we are, eDays is a leading provider of absence and leave management software. We are talking a lot about bank holidays today, and they've been a topic of conversation over the last year or so due to the extra ones given with the passing of Queen Elizabeth II last September and the coronation of King Charles III taking place next month. Since the introduction of the Bank Holidays Act in 1871, the UK's shared holiday dates have remained relatively fixed. A number of these do relate to dates in the Christian calendar, which naturally may not be significant to everyone. In the UK, the vast majority of employers do give bank holidays as fixed days off, but they don't have to. They can offer the 28-day statutory allowance however they like. This is why we're currently seeing a number of organisations introducing a pick and mix bank holiday policy, which allows employees to opt out of national bank holidays and take the time off when it suits them instead. So in this discussion, then, we'll get into the potential benefits and possible challenges of introducing such a policy. But let's just get some initial thoughts from everyone watching. Do you think that a flexible bank holiday policy is a good idea? We have popped a question in the chat, so do go ahead and answer that. We have two guest speakers joining us today. They are Nahida Ahmed, who is Senior Equality, Diversity and Inclusivity Consultant at HMRC, and Paul Knighton, who is a Senior HR Business Partner at EE. I am also joined by my colleague Jenny from eDays, who I will hand over to in a moment. She will be hosting the main part of this webinar. So firstly, just onto the introductions. Paul, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Yes, my name is Paul Knighton. As on the side there, I work at EE. I look after our customer care unit, which is our contact centre estate here, around 12,000 people, and look after primarily the home broadband customer care division within that too. And I also have a number of lead roles across consumer. And in contact centres, one of my lead roles is around diversity and inclusion. And we've recently implemented this policy. So that's why I'm joining the call today.
Great, thank you, Paul. And Nahida, I'll ask you to introduce yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So I work at HMRC at the moment, and I'll tell you why I say at the moment in a bit. I predominantly look after religion or belief and non-belief, as well as race, and I look after all of the learning portfolio across HMRC. HMRC has about 65,000 people, and I sit in central HR, so I'm predominantly the centre of expertise on those three subjects across the organisation. I am tomorrow is my last day in HMRC. I moved to the Trust, which is the UK's largest food bank charity, and I start with them as Director of People and Inclusion in a couple of weeks' time.
Fantastic, thank you both. Really good to have you both with us today. Just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will last for about 40 to 45 minutes. The chat will be open throughout, so please do send us your thoughts, comments or questions. We'll keep an eye on this and respond to some as we go. This webinar is being recorded, and so the on-demand version will be emailed to you afterwards. We will also send these presentation slides across to you, which includes a top tips crib sheet at the end for promoting inclusivity in the workplace. And now I will hand you over to Jenny.
Thanks, Georgina. Hi, everyone. Great to have you with us today. We're sort of talking about this right now because, as I'm sure a number of you are aware, there are a number of religious events and celebrations that are either happening or have happened in April, which includes Easter, Eid and Passover. Interestingly, they've actually occurred at the same time this year, which is a once in 100-year event. But, you know, regardless of sort of religious beliefs or, you know, indeed, if someone doesn't have any at all, they're given Easter off as standard, you know, if they're given UK bank holidays. So we're starting to sort of question that approach, you know, looking at things like a flexible bank holiday policy, which could help to boost cultural inclusivity. So let's start by looking at the importance of it then. So I'll come to you first, Nahida. What do you think is the importance of cultural inclusivity in the workplace? Like, why is it so important to promote it?
Well, it allows people to learn about, firstly, allows people to learn about different kinds of people, accept those cultural differences. It becomes the norm around recognising that everybody has different cultures and belongs to different cultures. It helps to develop meaningful relationships between people because they understand similarities as well as differences with each other. Gives them a sense of belonging to an organisation, and in turn that improves employee engagement, improves productivity, and a whole host of organisation. There's a whole host of academic research to suggest that actually if you've got happy people, you're going to have a better productivity at the end of it and better outcomes.
Yeah, that's so true. And same question to you then, Paul. What do you see as the importance of cultural inclusivity in the workplace?
Yeah, I think as has been said, I just echo everything there too. And really, I think it's important that leaders and in HR as well, that we're all aiming and working towards and creating an environment where all our colleagues feel safe, feel included, and everyone can thrive. And that is about, learning about different cultures. It's about learning about different backgrounds as well. And, as you've got on the slides there, sports engagement, well-being, and the retention of staff too. And that broader focus on inclusivity and cultural inclusivity and all that means, particularly lots of people in the workplace now or in the market for new roles, they are looking at employers and they want to work for an employer that shares their values. So it's really important that within our organisations that we're creating that environment where people feel safe, included, can be who they are, and that we're all open-minded and humble enough to want to learn about different cultures.
And it's worth also adding, actually, it helps you serve the people that your organisation is there to serve because you better understand different cultures. We're such a diverse society, and if you actually understand the different cultures, you're much more likely to be a better service officer of whatever service you're providing to the customers.
Yeah, that's so true. Thanks, both of you. And like you say, it's good for employees, good for business, good for customers. As you can see on these slides at the minute, there's a number of interesting stats around how it can help, with the new markets, better decisions, attracting new candidates and things like that. So we won't obviously delve into all those stats right now, but as my colleague Georgina mentioned, you'll get a copy of these slides after today's session. Moving on then, so we'll start to look at a flexible bank holiday policy. Just having a look at the poll that we popped in the chat before, some quite mixed responses actually, which is interesting. The vast majority of you are either undecided or you believe that there's pros and cons. So, that's great for today's session because we're obviously about to jump straight into it. So I'll come to you first, Paul, because obviously you have implemented such a policy at EE. So it'd be great to hear a little bit about, when you did this, how you came to this decision, how you found it.
Yeah, certainly. So we actually implemented it this month. So this was the first month we went live with the start of our new leave year to marry up with the new financial year. And I think, the impact of that and the challenges that you find will very much depend on the sort of business that you're operating in and the certain types of colleagues you have in your organisation. So by that I mean, in EE we've got quite a large back office corporate function, things like HR, marketing, finance, etc. In those sorts of corporate teams, as I would term them, implementing this policy is generally a bit easier because ultimately colleagues can speak to their manager and just let them know that actually, do you know what? I'm happy to work Good Friday and I'll take that day back as leave another time. I think the thing to consider in kind of corporate teams is one, if people don't have facilities to work from home, I'm guessing offices may not be open on some of those days, so that might prevent people from it there too. Also need to think about terms and conditions as well, so depending on people's contracts of employment, might they be entitled to a payment for working a UK bank holiday or not? And how would you consult with colleagues and the representative bodies on that too? And then in the second environment I'll talk about is in contact centres. So as I mentioned, I look after one of our contact centre estates here in EE. And our contact centres are open, 365 days a year. If people have a fault with their broadband or a fault with their mobile, they expect to get served on any day of the year. So our colleagues had an element of choice already about whether they could work a bank holiday or not. And in frontline customer-facing areas, you really have to consider the impact on customers, as well as trying to balance colleagues too. So we did think of a specific approach for our contact centres, which I'll talk a little bit about later. But ultimately, it's about balancing those things to give people more choice over how they use their leave, and being able to give them something that feels valuable to them too, whilst balancing all those elements.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Like you say, it's about sort of recognising each employee's individual needs. Nahida, do you think that that's a good way to go about doing that? Do you think a flexible bank holiday policy is a good idea?
Yeah, if you think about the amount of people that actually take those religious days off anyway for annual leave, you can almost justify that people aren't going to be in the office on that day anyway. And I think it's all about the size and scope of the organisation, what's their business that they do. Because you'll understand that there are some organisations, as just been said around EE, that need to provide a service. So they need to have the people there to do that work. But actually, it's getting some data together. I think that's who we really start, is getting some insight and data from your people to really understand how many people are in the office on that day anyway. So the chances are they're going to take off Eid, because that's, they're the days that people are going to be taking off. However, it's also important to recognise that if you're operating a policy such as flexible bank holiday policy, it needs to be, to avoid discrimination, needs to be available to everybody. And therefore, for example, if there is someone that is not practicing Judaism, but actually has a family that is celebrating Judaism and therefore wants to take that day off, they have to be able to be given that opportunity as well. So it goes a little bit wider than, do you associate with or observe a particular religion or belief or non-belief. So it does go a lot wider than that. There are different approaches that people can take, so it doesn't have to be every bank holiday is flexible. You can take, if there's 7 or 8 in the year, you take 7 or 8. So some organisations, for example, may change that. And I know PwC, for example, is a very large organisation, and that's international as well. And they do allow only 2. So people can use 2 of their bank holidays, for example, as flexible, and the rest are much more rigid and normal to what we are used to. But it does, for me, it's definitely something that every organisation should be starting to consider.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I believe, Paul, have you got certain things, certain ones that are set in stone or anything at EE, like associated with busy periods and things like that? Have you guys tried to manage it to kind of tailor it to yourselves?
That's right. I think Nahida's made a good point there. So in contact centres, our approach was our flexible bank holiday pot is essentially 5 of those 8, or in Northern Ireland that's 10. So again, we're thinking about the different regions of the UK operating too. But we used 5. The 3 Christmas and New Year bank holidays, so Christmas Day, Boxing Day, New Year's Day, we've kind of retained them under a special days policy. But ultimately, the impact on customer demand on those days is so great, and the amount of people who want those days off still remains so great. So again, being aware of what who your people are and what they want in terms of leave on those days means that we're still going to operate that on a volunteer basis, with the other 5 days flexible bank holidays essentially given to colleagues to use up front at the start of the year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So I guess that's kind of the logistics of implementing a policy like this. But what do you think the impact is? Like, how has the sort of implementation of this policy gone down with employees? How has it sort of affected your culture? Do you think it's had a positive effect?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, it's still very, very early days. We launched it last quarter to start from the new leave year in April. But in our employee engagement survey that we got in February, that we run annually, there was positive sentiment about flexible bank holidays in that too. When we announced it last year, our annual event, EE Live, it was met with a round of applause from the audience there in the NEC too. And actually, just in the sort of 4 or 5 weeks since we've launched it in contact centres specifically, we've had over 900 colleagues book over 1,600 flexible bank holidays. So, we're kind of running at a rate of 200 a week are being booked, and already 10% or so of the population has booked one. So very good impact considering how early on we are today.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like it's going down the treat so far. Very popular. Nahida, what do you think, what benefits does it offer then to people of religious background, and like you say, it's not just people who are like practicing religions, it might be to do with family, or indeed like if people are atheists and they don't want to take religious holidays off, how do you think that impacts the people that we offer it to?
I'll speak from personal experience. So when we come to, if we've got Eid coming up towards the end of this week, and I've had to take 3 days off, so that actually I don't know when it's going to fall within those 3 days. So hopefully it'll be one of them will be a weekend. But actually, I've asked, if it fell during a week, I would have to take 3 days off and then maybe to give 1 or 2 back. And it just really makes it difficult because that's 3 days of my annual leave already taken, which I could actually avoid, use so elsewhere. Now, if I look at for a Muslim, that's 2 Eids, that's 6 days of annual leave that automatically get taken away just for those 2 holidays or 2 festivals that I want to celebrate with my family, which then reduces the time that I can take during summer to go on holiday, a whole host of other things. But equally, it can go beyond those sort of festival holidays. It can go into bereavement. So we know, for example, in Judaism and in Islam, we bury our loved ones within 24, 48 hours. And quite often that comes out of our annual leave if a organisation doesn't have special leave policies, and especially if they're not so close. There are other things that really feed into the benefits that it has for me. So, for example, Judaism, a lot of colleagues go into, if they've lost a loved one, go into Sabbath for 7 days. And therefore, again, having that flexibility to use bank holidays at a time that is so important to their customs, to their family, to their culture, to their religion, will have such a benefit to their well-being and their work-life balance. I do think there is something around future-proofing it. So there's got really good benefits around advertising as an organisation that you have flexible bank holiday policy, and that will attract much more diverse colleagues into the organisation, or people into the organisation. And actually, the more diverse you get, and the more people that you get from different religions, the greater the demand is going to be for those holidays at specific dates, especially for festivals such as Diwali, Eid, etc. So it's really making sure that as an organisation you're also aware of the potential. So it sounds brilliant, but actually it needs to be future-proofed. And as a business, as an organisation, you need to consider the impacts long-term as well as the short-term immediate impacts.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like you say, it can have such a knock-on effect in a positive way for your organisation, whether that be through attracting new talent or, just the impact on employee well-being. So there's obviously a lot of sort of motivators for organisations to consider implementing something like this. But, it's not necessarily a sort of quick thing to do because, like you say, there's so many things to consider. Paul, were there any specific things you had to consider when working out how to roll this out, or anything that other businesses might need to think about in terms of introducing something like this?
Yeah, so as you say, it took us near enough 9 months to design and deploy this. And as I mentioned earlier, I think in our kind of corporate head office type teams, it was a little bit simpler. But ultimately it's around the sort of the mindset that, there should be no questions asked if someone wants to do this. This is just a good thing, and we should, as the way someone books annual leave, if someone wants to utilise a flexible bank holiday, then, we let them do it. We don't need them to prove something. It's up to individuals' choice. As I say, in customer facing teams and in our contact centres, obviously there was a lot more work because we had to balance the resourcing element. So I think from our perspective, our resourcing teams, have to put in a new process and additional overhead to sort of manage that. So it's worth organisations thinking about, particularly in big customer facing organisations, how they might manage that overhead as well. And whilst that might be an additional overhead or additional piece of work for people to do, again, as Nahida said, we are using this in our attraction campaigns as well. So it is virtuous in that sense too. I think in customer facing team that that do work 365 days a year, as I said, there is that element of choice already. So our approach was to take 5 of those bank holidays and say to people that if you book a day's leave 10 weeks in advance, that's a flexible bank holiday, you'll get it off guaranteed. So that was kind of the approach we chose for customer facing, because ultimately, like I say, not bank holidays are normalized in our world. And I think, again, just being clear on explaining that to people, working in partnership with trade unions and employee representative bodies as well. And one thing we did very much along the way was like listen to colleagues. So before we embarked on this, we asked colleagues what their perceptions were of how bank holidays were managed in contact centres. And then during the process, we sought feedback from colleagues as well. So really, listening to people, getting their views and helping, using them to sort of test and iterate your policy or process, I think is really valuable too.
Yeah, definitely. And like you say, it's about considering your own work environment, I guess. Like you said, you had to take a different approach to maybe the more corporate side versus the more customer facing side. So lots of things for people to consider there. Nahida, based on that then, do you think there's any barriers that would prevent businesses from looking into something like this? We know that not everyone works a kind of office job or a typical 9 to 5. Is there certain industries that maybe couldn't do this? Like, what would they need to consider if they wanted to look into a policy like this?
I think we've mentioned quite a few of those things, but I think there is something around scheduling, because actually the increased workload, as Paul mentioned, for scheduling something like this is going to be enormous, depending on what size of the organisation is. There's been organisations that use a quota system, so there has to be at any one time 20% of people in this line of business that needs to be in the office. I think there's something around considering management capability as well, and line manager capability. Do they have the capability to have those discussions with people, especially when there's been a really high demand and you're not fulfilling your quota to have enough people in the organisation? So how capable are your managers in having those one-to-one conversations and team conversations to ensure that actually everybody's treated fairly? There's also something around making sure that they understand the equality, diversity and inclusion perspective of it, specifically around the legislation around positively discriminating. So, for example, if I was to ask for a holiday and I based it on my religion and said I want that day off because of a religious festival, and 20 other people in my team also asked for the time off and don't actually have a religious reason for wanting it, but equally have a really valid reason, how does that stand within the legal framework? So there's a real consideration here about making sure that everybody is fully versed and knowledgeable about what they can and can't do, and having those clear guidelines. And I'm really big on management toolkits. So that actually, as the Centre of Expertise in the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion space, I have given people the toolkits that they need to answer those questions, and making sure that they are absolutely confident in having those sometimes quite difficult conversations and quite sensitive conversations. So that's one consideration. I think the other one is also around what else can you do? And I think that sort of lead on quite nicely to the next question you're likely to ask us, because sometimes there is other things that can be done. And again, especially the larger the organisation, the harder it is for a manager to know everything that's available for an individual to offer their team and their people. So it's really, really knowing that your managers feel supported and feel valued. They're not put into sticky situations where they're having to deal with conflict within a team because they are approving one on the other. And there's something here around bias as well. So really picking up on making sure that they're not biased towards one. One of the things I often hear from managers is the fear of getting things wrong. And therefore they will, anybody that's from a religious background or an ethnic background or disability, is disabled, they will treat more favourably because they are fearful that if they do anything untoward or slightly on that sort of borderline, they may get called up on it. So it really is about giving people, managers in particular, the confidence to make those decisions.
Yeah, that's such a good point. It's all about sort of empowering people, managers, isn't it? And a policy is always, you know, a great first step. It's just that process, that education, and that, like you say, that toolkit sort of to back it up. Paul, if businesses can't implement a flexible bank holiday, you know, for minimum staffing reasons or because it's just not suitable, are there any other leave policies that could kind of promote cultural inclusivity? At eDays, we have like Me Days, for example, and there's other enhanced leave things that people offer. Is there anything else that you'd kind of think would be a good idea?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of companies looking at this now across a whole spectrum of industries, and something I've been doing a lot of research on after flexible bank holidays to think about what might be next and what could we look at within EE as well. I think one very simple one that Nahida mentioned earlier was special leave. As just mentioned, you've got special leave policy for emergencies and such like as well. But if you look across what's happening in the market at the moment, you've got things from paid sabbaticals after so many years of service, annualized hours / term time leave companies are looking at too. And I think one thing that's that I've seen more and more of in the last couple of years has been around sort of equity on parental leave, and also for certain life events as well. So as we all go through life, things may happen to us or happen to our loved ones, and a lot of companies are looking at policies with additional flexibility and perhaps additional leave around things like fertility, treatment, or care responsibilities as well. And I think our responsibility in HR and as HR professionals really is to understand our people. Like, who are our people? What's their composition? What are their needs? And what are the things that we could look at to promote belonging and inclusivity? The policies that we may need to look at and relook at to promote equity as well, to make sure that we're not leaving any colleague behind, and that, again, from whatever period in their life that people have and whatever experience they might be going through, that they felt safe, included, and supported by their company as well.
Yeah, definitely. It's so important. And, as we mentioned earlier, all the reasons why, but it's about no colleague left behind. I like that, what you just said. If we look in sort of the wider space, then, inclusivity in the workplace is such a massive topic. I'm sure we could delve into this for at least a couple of hours, but just sort of outside of the realm of leave, then, those kind of policies that we've talked about already, how else can we kind of promote it? Are there any other initiatives in businesses or, things that we can kind of offer employees that would give them that sense of inclusion? Nahida, I'll come to you first. What are your thoughts on that?
Gosh, I could talk on this subject for hours. There is so much that organisations can do, so if we look at an employee life cycle, right from that attraction space to recruitment, making sure right through to sort of retirement, actually, and resignation. So it can broadly cross all of those specific cycles, stages of the cycle. For example, if you're looking at recruitment, having independent panel members, diverse panel members, having advisory boards that actually feed into the senior leadership's meetings and decision making, having inclusive language guides so that people actually are more confident in the language that they're using. So I'm a big believer of case studies and also about storytelling. So getting people to be able to be upfront around their storytelling and the lived experiences that they've actually have to face, and then collectively overcoming those barriers and those challenges and those disparities that exist in organisations. Things such as training and learning and develop, so people actually are not just going on a learning program, because you can go and do lots of quality inclusion learning, but actually following it up with how is this being applied, collecting that data, making sure that we actually are justifying what we do, and actually it's the data and insight that's informing every intervention that we take in an organisation. Otherwise, we say, oh, that sounds good, let's do it. So there's a lot to talk about mentoring and coaching. But actually, equally, there's some conversations that are starting now around sponsorship. So who's advocating for me? Who is talking about me as a capable Asian female when I'm not there? So really, really sponsoring me and opening those doors for me to allow me to progress, to allow me to bring my best to the organisation. And I think, in addition to that, we talk about disability, and we talk about the real basic needs of individuals that some organisations still aren't doing. So things around making sure IT is accessible, every document that we have or we develop is accessible to all our users, and using regardless of what software they use, making sure our estates are flexible, making sure our estates actually show a vast range of diverse people. So, for example, we've worked a lot on making sure that all our new buildings have pictures that are diverse, because when you walk in, you see lots of different things. So, I'm going to plug one of our receptions. Actually, you walk in, and it says hello in about 50 different languages written on a wall. And that makes me feel included. It makes me feel valued, because someone's actually taken the time to research all the different languages and say hello to everyone or good morning in different languages. So there is a lot of very small things that organisations can do to make you feel like you belong to that part and feel valued, as well as lots of the different policies that you can really do. And like you said earlier on, you can have as many policies as you like. If they're not embedded and not interpreted in the way that they were written, then they just become a tick box exercise.
Yeah, and it's so important that obviously it's not that, isn't it? It's like you say, it's about really ingraining it in the culture. Paul, what do you think? Is there anything else sort of about promoting inclusivity in the workplace? I mean, obviously, like Nahida mentioned, inclusivity is not just culture and religion, which is kind of what we're focusing on today, but disability, gender, everything, like sort of across the spectrum. Are there other ways that you can think that we can effectively promote this?
Yes, well, I think Nahida gave a great account there of all the things that organisations could do. I won't repeat any of that. I'll just offer three more. But firstly, I'll just start with inclusion, the word, and the philosophy, if you like, starts with I. There's a very good Accenture video on YouTube that I think is worth watching, because it really is about everyone and everyone's experience in the organisation as well. And particularly with flexible bank holidays, one thing I've observed when we introduce this, into EE is that how people are using that. So for some people, it's about attending Pride. For some people, it's about Ramadan and Eid. For some people, it is about Christian bank holidays. For others, it's about a football match, or it's about the kid's birthday, or it's about the anniversary of someone who died. So it really is personal to each person. And I think that's the beauty in it. It's not just about culture or just about race. It can be about people's identity and all the things that make up their identity and all the things that people find important in those days that really matter to them throughout the year as well. And I think just a couple of other things in terms of how we can promote inclusivity. I'll just add that I think, being clear that this is a value in the organisation, that it's something that when we're looking at assessing people and assessing behaviours and assessing sort of top talent as well, that within that we've got a standard and expectation around inclusivity, around promoting inclusivity, around leading diverse teams, and all that comes with that as well. And particularly for leaders, that should be a clear leadership standard for people to work to and be cognizant of as well. And then secondly, I think one thing that we're looking at really is about how you connect with the community. So we've got over 20 contact centres in all parts of the UK, from Truro to Dundee to Enniskillen, and in the northeast of England as well. And really, where you're a big employer or an employer, it's really important that you connect with your local community, connect with organisations and advocacy groups in your local community. Promote volunteering time, and EE, we give colleagues 3 days volunteering a year, and use that to kind of partner with purpose in your local community with underrepresented groups, because often from some of my experiences is that some people from some backgrounds just think working at a company just isn't for them because they have like a view of EE or BT. So actually sometimes just breaking that down and getting people into your site, into your office, and showing them, what work you do and the people who work there, that can really promote inclusivity, can help colleagues feel more purposeful in their roles when they're sort of volunteering and raising money for these causes. But again, then you might find that you have a pipeline and people that might want to come and work for you as well. So I think that's one thing a lot of companies could do a lot more of.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And I think you've both kind of echoed similar points, that it's all about education and it's all about really ingraining it into the culture and doing what you kind of say you're going to, isn't it? So, hopefully a flexible bank holiday is the start of that.
Yeah. I think it's also accountability. So for so long, inclusion has been my problem. Racism has been my problem because I'm from that background. And actually, it's transferring that over to actually this should be everyone's responsibility. Everyone's responsible for making sure we are an anti-racist organisation. And I think the one thing that we haven't mentioned is allies, and really bringing up allyship and being that active standby bystanders. So if you see something that's not right, having the courage to stand up and speak up and say something, even though it may not have been directed at you. So I think those two really, really key points around it needs to be everyone's responsibility, and you have a responsibility to do something about it as well.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And it sort of links back nicely to what Paul said, which is, inclusion starts with I. So whether that's about your own identity or your own responsibility to sort of take that upon yourself as well, I think that's a really nice way to sort of actually wrap up today's session, because unfortunately we're about out of time. So thank you both so much. I'm just going to hand back to Georgina to sort of wrap things up.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really great discussion. I hope everyone watching enjoyed it. As I mentioned earlier, this webinar will be available to watch again on demand. We'll get this emailed across to you this afternoon. And the slides will also be sent to you with a top tips crib sheet at the end, which we hope you'll find useful as well. If you'd like to learn more about how eDays can help your organisation with managing leave, please do visit our website, e-days.com, where you can book a free demo. Thanks again to everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you again in a future webinar. Thank you.